Good evening, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for February 13th, 2023. We welcome everyone to this meeting. To begin with, anyone who's in the audience that wants to follow along with us, our agendas are out the door to my left, and if you turn to the right, they're on the table, and you can find those. Anybody watching from home, you can go to our website, livoniapublicschools.org, and highlight over the board tab, and you can drop down, and you will find our agenda for this evening. This is not a real long agenda, so hopefully we'll be able to get through it rather expeditiously. The Committee of the Whole meeting is where we really delve into the items that are coming before the board that will ultimately be voted on at our next regular meeting, which is 2 weeks from now, February 27th. I don't believe we have a meeting next week. So it'll be 2 weeks from now. And this is the meeting where, if you want to know the issues and what we're going to talk about and the items on the agenda, listen closely. If you want to go back and listen to other Committee of the Whole meetings, you can find those on our website as well. One of the things that we strive for on this board, we talk about our community with character, and the biggest thing that we expect and deal with is respect. And that means that anyone who comes before this board, you have our assurance that you will be respected, and in return, we would ask that you respect the board, anyone who is speaking, and the cabinet. It's a great way to teach our children how to act and how to respect others, and we've lived that day in and day out. So we will go to our first item, which is audience communication. I do not have any blue slips. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to address the board in audience communication? I don't see a great rush to the table, so we will move on to item 2, our Committee of the Whole. I don't think we have anything under Committee of the Whole. Is that correct, Mrs. Oquist?
That's correct, President Johnson.
Thank you. That moves us to item 3, building and site, and I will turn it over to our chair, Mr. Centers.
Thank you, President Johnson. This evening we have several items, the first of which is a quarterly dashboard update for the fourth quarter of 2022. Mr. Francis will be presenting that, and it looks like Brian and Paul's just hanging out? Okay, all right. Thank you for being here tonight.
Yep. Hi, Brian.
How are you?
Good evening. Thanks, Brian.
Got it?
Two there.
We love the dashboard. Absolutely. Quarterly dashboard.
These started with Randy earlier.
Yeah, always so nicely placed.
All right, gentlemen, go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Alrighty.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
This is the fun time of the year. 4 times a year we get to do the quarterly dashboard. It is an important item. It's really a great summation of what's occurred, and it shows the finances of the bond initiative and where we're at and where our expenditures are going, and just sort of leveling out some of the information once every quarter during the year. So this is from 2022 quarter 4 that Brian's going to run through with you. So everybody's got one of their copies?
Oh. All right, we'll start in the top left. These are the bond program goals and objectives. These stay the same. This is what was advertised to the community with the marketing campaign, making sure we're still aligning with everything that was proposed and keeps our focus on the main priorities of the program. So just highlighting everything that was included there. Rolling over to the right to the cost summary, I'll give a highlight of each of the columns, each of the categories, and feel free to stop me as needed if anybody has any questions. Starting across the top there, the current budget. This is how much money is allocated towards each one of the categories in the rows to the left. Column B would be the current contracts and purchase orders. So this is everything to date that has been board approved and has a signature on a contract or a purchase order. Would tally those numbers. Actuals paid are the costs, actual paid or money out the door against those contracts in POs in column B. Column D is just simple math of B minus C, showing how much money is remaining on those contracts and POs. Forecasted contracts and purchase orders. So this is money that is not yet a signed contract or a signed purchase order, but we know is coming down the road. So we're planning ahead and making sure that money is set aside for those future services and costs. And then rolling into columns F and G. So column F is unallocated reserve. Normally this would be where our contingencies are held, whether owner or construction or unallocated costs that I'll say floating out there, but not committed to anything or assigned to anything. Scrolling down to the bottom is a contingency line on the last row. Typically that owner contingency would be sitting in there, but based on how we've allocated costs for robotics, early childhood, and some of the cost overages or price increases in escalation, we didn't want to show that out there as free money just floating out there. It's something that we have discussed. As we've talked to you guys, understanding there's been overages, we've assigned those costs. We didn't want to leave it out there as an unallocated reserve. So that's why that column is at 0 right now.
And like Brian said, each time we've come to something, we've had those conversations with the board. So that wouldn't be anything that would be new. This is just a summation of the items we've already discussed with the board and items that we've already contracted with.
Highlighting a little bit, not to go through every single number, but feel free, but touching on construction midway through on the row, in column B, you'll see that $67 million is current contracts and purchase orders. This is showing all work through renovations through 2023, 2022, but does not include the early childhood center. So shifting over to column E, there's $63 million. That was board-approved money. We are still working through to get all contracts signed, so we did not shift that over as a committed cost yet. So that's why that money is not yet moved over. So in the span of about 20 months, we're less than 2 years, we're gonna be darn near $90 million, about 70% committed in construction costs. So we've been pressing pretty hard in this program right now. So it's been a lot of good progress in the less than 2 years we've been rolling through the program.
Yeah, we took a pretty big bite out of the AC, and we've obviously the two big builds with being the LCTC/Robotics Center, and now we'll be seeing when we do Q1 of 2023, a few months down the road, you'll see more of those robotics dollars than committed. I mean, I said robotics, I meant ECC, more committed.
Are there any questions specifically with the financials and the cost summary? I don't want to get anything lost in the shuffle or breeze through any of anybody's questions.
Looks like we're all right.
Okay.
We do have the footnote below the cost summary box that just mentions that we have funds from sinking fund, food service fund, and capital projects, that portion of those in that scope of 2021 bond projects. So we've discussed those as well as we moved along. For example, with regard to the food service fund, there's equipment that's going into kitchens that we're using the food service fund to partially fund some of those projects with regard to equipment. That's just one example.
That's good, yeah. And another, that's a good topic. The sinking fund, we've identified some, like a water main project that was typically allocated towards sinking fund for robotics or ECC. That's something that we've wrapped up to be more efficient in that project and use those funds accordingly with some of the stuff that was earmarked for sinking fund projects previously. So we've integrated some of those costs as we've gone along too.
A good example of that is over at LCTC, where we knew for a couple of years now, we've had our eye on the water main at that property. It's probably something that we've talked about, if any of you recall. So that was always planned to be a sinking fund item.
Dan?
Oh, Mrs. Burns.
Regarding the line that says a portion of the scope of the 2021 bond is being supplemented by funds from the sinking fund, food service, et cetera, capital projects. Are we going to see that anywhere, or is there going to be a dollar figure associated with it, or am I missing it somewhere in here?
You know,
I mean, I know this is bond, but
Yeah, this is a conversation we had about this, and Allison can jump in here.
Thank you. So you would not see that reflected on the quarterly dashboard, but you'll see that reflected in our budget amendments and on the budget books. And then as we describe the expenditures, what's coming out of those funds, then we'll talk about what's helping augment the 2021 bond program costs. Last go around, we started adding in some sinking fund dollars into here, but it actually doesn't really match up with how we keep our books, because they're totally separate funds
Right.
for that purpose. So we thought this would be the most clean way to do it, but there'll definitely be detail. Those purchases would be coming to the board for approval before any of those dollars are spent on bond projects.
Okay. Could we have something added, even just to a next sentence then, since it, and I understand why it doesn't identify the dollars exactly, but just maybe after a portion of the scope of this is supplemented by funds from the sinking fund, food service, and capital projects, could I suggest just a second sentence that says, these funds will be reflected in the budget amendments, or something that will identify where we can find those funds?
Yeah.
Because when
Yeah,
we're,
we can certainly
Yep.
speak to that those funds will be reflected in any budget amendments in the overall budget book
right,
updated
just where some,
annually.
if someone's
Mhm.
watching this, that they can see where that is gonna show up.
Yeah, and we did have conversation about whether or not to include this in the overall dashboard, and we thought it may be confusing as we started with the $186 million
Yeah.
bond. And so then when we start adding in dollars, whether it's from grant funds, as you recall, for the security cameras, or dollars from the food service fund, that it didn't completely make sense to include this on here, but we
Right.
did want to reflect that. So we can certainly asterisk that and note where people can find that information.
Exactly, yep. Yeah, I agree, and I understand why we don't wanna put it in here, but if we're gonna refer to it, then let's tell folks, ourselves and others, where they can find it, so.
Yep, that's a great suggestion.
We've made note of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll shift down just to continue on the financial portion of it. So below is just showing our deposits for Series 1, 2, and 3. So as you'll see in Series 1, total bond series was at $78.1 million. The construction proceeds were received at $77.7 million. The big change here from last time is a projected earned interest, and Alice can probably speak to it more than I, but the market has changed, so we were very low comparatively speaking to start this program. Interest rates are increasing to our benefit, and our last forecast was hovering around $745,000 is a projected earned interest for the Series 1 bond sale. So we've reflected accordingly.
What did we initially have in there, Allison?
To initially start, it was even less than $100,000
It was 80.
because interest rates were so low. We then worked with PFM, our financial advisors, and MyLaugh, and got some things in different CDs and different term bonds, and that brought it up to $385,000, I want to say. But with interest rates now in our MyLaugh accounts that are basic, they're not CDs, they don't tie up our cash, we're earning over 4.5%. The last I looked, it was 4.67% on our investments, so that's wonderful. And again, those funds are still accessible, so it doesn't tie our hands in any way with moving forward with our projects.
Thank you for continuing to seek that out, as opposed to just sitting on it and accepting that it is what it is.
Yes, I'm excited, and we'll talk about that next month with our budget update too. I've moved over some of our general fund investments. The MyLife accounts were approved by the board back in July at our was it July or August? But in the summer at our organizational meeting, so we've had an existing MyLife account, but we traditionally are using those for the debt retirement funds and for our sinking fund and the bond fund. We've never done general fund, but with the interest rates where they are right now, it made sense to make that shift. So it was neat. Just between December and January, I moved it over before Christmas, and January we've made $150,000 in interest on the portion of general fund dollars that, again, we still have enough in our normal day-to-day checking account to run everything we need to run, but we'll take advantage of that while we can.
Absolutely.
Allison, can you just make sure that, since we're talking about moving money around, that we assure everyone that we have very stringent policies on what we can and where we can put our money and what the risk factors we can endure on that stuff, and that you're not just running wild, you know what I mean? Because people get a little nervous when we start talking about transferring money around, and just, can you just assure everyone that?
Yeah, that's one, that's where we do all of our investments, is through MyLaugh, which is a group that was set up by MSB, the Michigan Association of School Boards. It was MSBO, a partnership, because there are very strict guidelines on what you can invest your money in, because the idea is first and foremost to safeguard the funds. You don't want to lose it in risky investments, so it's very tied down in what we can do. Thankfully, these CDs and some of the bonds that we can put the money into are within those parameters. But even within the transferring money too, there's processes so that the transfer are only taking place between district accounts. So it's going from a Livonia Public Schools Chase account to the Livonia Public Schools MyLife account. When a transaction takes place, the superintendent gets a notification. Our bookkeeper, myself, we all get email notifications so that if something, an account got added or something like that, there's a lot of approvals that have to take place before any of that can happen again. So we're safeguarding the funds and everybody's aware of what's taking place.
And that's part of the audit, and this is a little bit different than normal since the interest rates have gone up. Then this will be part of our annual audit process as well. They will review this.
They do, yep, make sure. So on all of our bank accounts, where we've got 2 signers on all of the accounts, so if we are adding somebody, it's either Andre and I are the primary signers on the accounts, and with our Chase account, our finance manager also has the ability to add, like if we've got a new bookkeeper in the office and we need to add somebody to the account, it always takes 2 signatures to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. And I may know the answer to this question, and I think it's more for Mrs. Smith. Under column B, which is current contracts and purchase orders, it's 87.8 million. But down below, under Series 1, our funds available is only 78,000,
Million.
or 78 million. There's a difference of $9 million there. I think I know that answer, but if you could explain that to us.
I can speak to that. So we have committed those dollars, understanding that if you move over one column, Series 2, that bond sale is taking place this spring. So going down to the bottom of Series 1, it shows current funds available of $43.3 million. That money is still in the bank to pay the bills. And we don't forecast spending all that $43 million by this spring. So we will get the next round of money of the $69.7 million this spring that will cover. That is a great question to notice that there is an overage, but the second series will cover.
That's what I thought. but-
Yes.
Okay.
And again, this is from Q4 2022, so we're all living in the middle of February of
Right.
2023, knowing that we've already done the ECC bids and opened them up and approved that, and we're thinking of all those other monies. For the folks at home, just remember, this is going through the calendar year of 2022, so it does lag slightly from real time and what we all know we've already done.
Yeah, it was just a question, when you look at it, there's that discrepancy, and someone might have that question.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Any other questions financially? All right, I will jump to the bottom left corner then, just to give a high level of some of the other items going on with the program. Critical items. So one of the notes is continue to monitor the ongoing construction and cost escalation and supply chain issues. It's kind of a broken record every time you hear me, but we think it's leveled off. We're seeing signs of improvement, or at least leveling off of everything that was a heck of a roller coaster a year and a half, 2 years ago. Continue to monitor it, obviously, understanding that we still have a lot to design and procure in this bond program, and monitoring the budget along the way. So that's something the team internally, and working with TMP, French, and Clark, understand what they're seeing as well, what we're seeing on our side, and manage it appropriately as we move along. Another hot item is completing the startup and commissioning for the air conditioning at the Phase 1 sites. No pun intended. The main program, or the goal, was to get air conditioning in the classrooms in the first 2 years of this bond program. This Phase 1 was the first half, if not more, of the district. So all the work has been put in place. There's still final startup of those units, which is a process that is temperature sensitive. So everything's ready to go. As soon as we get some breaks in the weather, as we roll into spring, the crews will return to these buildings and start the units accordingly, rolling building by building, which is a major focus, to make sure we can start turning some of the switches on at these units that have been installed. The next item is they maintain the LCTC/robotics schedule for the opening in the fall of '23. So I don't know if you guys have been out there recently, but it's a bit of a different world on that campus right now with the addition that's gone across the front and to the side with that new robotics field. So we are on schedule right now with the construction crew, managing everything outside the building proper. A lot of coordination, a lot of logistics issues with the active building, working in front and sides of the buildings and a little bit on top of it, with the intent of trying to get as much done at the new construction to save time. There is renovations going on in the building, so we can focus our efforts inside that building this summer and do a turnover for classes being ready in the summer. So things are going well out there, and like I said, if you haven't seen it, it's quite a different view from what it used to be. It's pretty impressive.
And related to that, just want to jump in and say that, so LCTC had their open house last week. It was a massive turnout of parents and students, and the staff, the whole crew everybody was great about the fact that when you pulled in, we had the criminal justice students out there, directing traffic, and it was tight. I mean, you pull in, as long as you followed where they were telling you to go, there were spots, but there was a lot of construction. It was hard to get to the construction trades and to the automotive program because that was kind of blocked off from areas. But everybody was very understanding, very gracious. The staff was well prepared. So just kudos to them because they are living in a construction zone, and it's not ideal. And this is why you don't usually want to do renovations and construction during the school year while there are students and staff there. But they have really hung in there this school year, and the families as well. So just a brief side note to give them a plug because it was a fantastic turnout, lots of people, and everybody just sort of said, this is for, it's that whole thing on the freeway, the short-term delay for your long-term,
Yep.
value and gain, so.
Alrighty, moving on to the next bullet point is rolling into the 2023 renovations. So this is continuing our Phase 2 summer renovations and air conditioning upgrades. So just a little bit of perspective, our 2022 renovations, we're just now receiving bids at this point. Looking at this year, we were able to get that out before the holidays. We already have crews in the buildings on night shifts right now, starting installation of overhead conduit or above ceiling utilities that thought being get in after school ends, clean up everything, nobody notices you're in the building, but getting a real big head start on some of the summer renovation work now that'll help lead to the success of getting air conditioning in the classrooms over the summer and ready for school next year. So good news on that front as well, that we've hit the ground running as well. Big items, we still have procurement to work through. The classroom equipment is one thing that'll come earlier. We are still tracking some of the larger air conditioning units, rooftop units for the gyms or library media centers. We already know it's still a supply chain issue, but we're planning ahead of not taking off those bigger pieces of equipment that are existing, and then we'll swap those all, prep the areas, but swap the equipment out. Some may arrive in the summer, others we're prepping for a little bit after the school year, but those would not affect classrooms. It would be the bigger areas that we're planning around right now for that phasing.
So
to
work on
pause there for a minute,
contingency.
because I know that was one of the questions the board had as we were talking about the earlier start in August. So just want to make sure if you have any questions about Brian's update on that.
Alrighty. Last one, we'll touch on the good old Early Childhood Center. So after following the award, we immediately started procuring materials, starting with steel and mechanical, electrical equipment issues. So there's actually been equipment mobilized to that site ahead of pending demolition work on that property, but the big push right away was trying to secure materials with the longer leads we know we're dealing with. So ultimate goal is to complete wrap in the early summer of '24, let the school district get in the building, understand their new facility. It's not as if you're getting back into the same building footprint. Have a couple months to get used to it, get started up, getting final inspections and certifications for the start in the fall of '24 is the goal for that one.
Great. Are we still, sorry, you have 2B and 3 to go through still, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I can touch on those very quickly. Our next two phases identified for the design process was Phase 2B. There are some doors and hardware throughout the buildings that we have not renovated yet. It was kind of a balance where we can pull some of that work ahead, get it off the summer rush schedule where it's quote-unquote filler work for this coming fall. We can take it off of the next summer's workload for our contractors, but also expedite security and safety in buildings that normally wouldn't be hit for the next year or two, that we can pull that work ahead and get into those buildings sooner.
Some of that was a practical item with regard to construction, like Brian described, and a lot of that was just the idea of saying, the buildings that go last, is it really something we want to wait on with regard to some of the hardware, which gives flip locks to certain areas and changes out the hardware to more appropriate door hardware, or even the whole door in some cases. Is it worth bringing it forward versus having to wait and go stage by stage for something like that? And it's something that we could pull forward. It helps on the construction end. It helps on the day-to-day use, the end user, and the staff in those buildings. So, and it won't a difference when we come back in those future 25 and 26 to do those types of things. To do the other work, it won't impede any. That'll have already been done.
And the last one, just to let everybody know, we did start our design phase for the 2024 renovation. We were having kickoff meetings a couple weeks ago, and that process is also underway.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, a lot going on. It's very exciting, though. Appreciate the update, as always.
This is not for the regular meeting.
Great, thank you. Mr. Weber, are you staying for the furniture purchase? Or
I
is
am.
All right, excellent. We'll roll right in then. Item 3B is LMC furniture purchase.
So
Mr. Francis, go ahead.
Yeah, the furniture purchase, I mentioned at the study session a little bit last week when we were together, just a reminder that this is minus the bookshelves. We had brought the bookshelves a few months back for lead time purposes. So the board had already approved, and we have already ordered bookshelves for the 2023 media centers. This is the remainder of the furniture package, which is, clearly a large package on its own, even without the bookshelves. We're talking about tables, chairs, soft seating, et cetera. And you should have, if you grabbed a packet with the staple on it, you'll see just the layout in all 5. Now, you had this in your committee of the whole packet. There was probably a good 79 or 80 pages in there, though. 5 of them were these, and a whole bunch of other pages were that very long list of pricing and quotes, et cetera. So if you missed that, we were not necessarily going to do a presentation on the furniture. We just thought it would be nice if we were talking about a building that you were putting a layout with the items that we're talking about proposing to purchase. So, if you want the very first one on top, that is Riley Upper Elementary. You can see the layout in the media center that we have in that right side of the page that you have. You can see that in this configuration, the southern portion is where the bookshelves, which are dotted in dashed red lines there. That's, again, the previous purchase, but making that area where it would be the stacks. And then you can see moving to the center and moving north, you have quite a bit of soft seating in different areas there. Small tables, different soft seating items. And then there's a little nook over here to the right where there's some more soft seating, reading places for the elementary students at Riley. And next to where the stacks are, there's tables and chairs in what would be student workrooms. So those could be group work spaces. Construction-wise, they'll be full glass fronts. You've seen other places that have that. Emerson has a very similar item. So we have tables and chairs in there. That's part of this package, along with now all the way in the upper right of the LMC, you've got a litany of tables with casters, and they're flip tables, as well as the student chairs. That's the flex classroom space that you've seen in the 2022 building. So in all, this will be a very familiar pattern with the other 4 buildings as well. You're going to see a lot of soft seating and a lot of tables and chairs for the flex classroom and other spaces that they can be mobile and move around. So I won't take the time unless you want me to. I'm happy to do each one of the rooms or each one of the LMCs at each building. But really just wanted you to see a little bit of a sure little color little color palette. So the second page is Franklin High School. This is a big renovation. We've got a large space at Franklin, and it really is exciting to think about how this is going to turn out. If you're familiar with Franklin right now, the bookshelves there are massive, very tall. The corner, when you enter the LMC and go to your left, there are some very tall blocking the area. The media specialist even said, I can't see what's going on over there when kids are back there. So any of the bookshelves, as we've talked about in the past and as we continue forward, any bookshelf that is floating, if you will, and by floating I mean not affixed to a wall, but in the middle of the room somewhere, will max out at 48 inches, so you can be able to look and have eyes across the library. If it is attached to a wall, then they can and oftentimes will be taller because you're not blocking any sight lines. If you look through Franklin, you can see the color palette. You have a lot of the reds and the blues, and then some neutrals, etc. Got some grays, and you'll see quite a bit of tables and chairs. There's high tops in here. We have booths that curve the wall. You'll recognize as the glass wall, and the bus loop is on the other side. We've got some booths there for students to collaborate, to just commiserate, hang out when they're in there. And the stacks are all to this south end. So we're knocking out some areas where there's some office space currently and scooting those office spaces over a bit and making that where the book stacks will all be located. And then taking over what is currently at Franklin, a computer lab, opening up that wall, putting the nano wall in, so you can see the rows of the tables to that northern end. So that would be Franklin.
Mr. Francis?
Yes.
And this curved wall on the right or the east side, that is the glass wall?
That's the glass wall. That's the bus loop on the other side of it.
Yep, okay.
When you get to the third page, you've got Rosedale Elementary. You'll see their color palette here is has a little more bright colors. It's got a lot of soft seating. It's really a K-4 elementary setup. It looks different than what we had just at Franklin High School. Also a much smaller space, but as you look at the map of it, you can see that, again, the same pattern. We have a flexible classroom. We have those tables on casters. We have chairs for students. You can see where the majority of their bookshelves are going along that curved section over at Rosedale, and you'll see a similar layout, but unique over at Cleveland because they're similarly shaped LMCs. Right when you walk in the LMC, to the right will be the Idea Factory. So you can see that we have furniture for the Idea Factory, similar to what we've already purchased from summer of 2022. And then you have an open area that has things like lily pads and soft seating for the young ones to have a reading session and reading time with the teacher. And as you look at the page itself, you can see the benches that would be going in the Idea Factory. You can see the circulation desk for the media specialists, et cetera. These are nice because they're in color and it gives you that sense of really, you know, what we're looking to do in that space with regard to colors and usability. The next one is Frost Middle School, another large space. We have over at Frost really kind of you've got the dark blues, et cetera, but you've also got a little greens. You've got some of that, I'm gonna call it chartreuse. Would we agree on that color? Okay. And then the tables, excuse me, also very similar. So really those tables are the same types of tables in all the buildings we're becoming familiar with. Got some soft seating booths, some single spaces, really a neat spot when you come into the main doors of the LMC at Frost. Students will be forced to walk through all the bookshelves. That's where all of them will be. So if you're coming into the library through those main doors, you're walking through this zone of literacy. And as you get through that space, right in the middle, you have this soft seating area for students. So they can grab a book, they can sit down, flip through it, or just sit with a couple of their friends, reading, etc. Then when you get into the main portion, to the right, and in this particular configuration up to the north side, you have the flexible classroom, same type of furniture we're putting in there as other flex rooms. In the middle, again, lots of tables, chairs, soft seating, little benches for students to sit at, etc. A whole big area. That's a nice chunk. It reminds me of that section at Riley too, that big area where students can kind of hang out, talk, grab a book, do some things there. And then the remaining portions to the south really end up being, that's this Idea Factory to the left, so all that furniture that we're used to going in there. And then there's, to the right side is really some offices, so not a part of this furniture package. Those are for staff. And finally, we have Cleveland, which again, will look a little bit familiar because it's got a similar shape as Rosedale did, but the design is different here. The Idea Factory, right when you enter from the south, and then you look to the right, that is where the Idea Factory is. You can see the mix of tables that we have in that space, which we've been doing in those elementary spaces. And to the left, you see a nice color rendering of what's going to be in there. You see these burnt oranges, and you see these yellows, and you see the polka dots and kind of the playfulness of the space, because again, now we're back to a K-4 building. And running through the LMC, again, very similarly, lots of space around that curved window, that curved glass at Cleveland that has lily pads and places for kids to sit. This is where the teacher can be working with them, and they're surrounded by their bookshelves. So they have their books, their seating spaces, their reading spaces, all in that area, and that really has the defined spaces of flex classroom, books and reading and lounge, for lack of a better word, and then coming in to the most south, we have that Idea Factory. So that's the layouts and the furnitures for the buildings. We do have, oh yeah.
One quick question, and
Yep,
it's,
go ahead.
I noticed it with the, well, a few of them. I understand that we did a lot of purging of our books in this whole process. Is that correct? And how, and if so, how did that turn out? I remember at the onset of the library renovation project on the whole, we were talking about it. We talked about the fact that we may have books in our libraries that are just not utilized. And part of this process is going to be a forced purge. So can you fill us in on how that went, and do we have enough bookshelves for the books that are actually being used a whole lot or not?
Yeah, so actually the basics, first I want to start off with thanking Paul Casada. He is the coordinator in academic services that oversees the media specialists. He's been working with them this year and last year, and really getting on not getting on them in the way
Right.
it sounds, but working with them and saying, make sure you start purging right away, because the folks that are going to go in the summer of '23 learned a lot from the summer of '22. In fact, I know the media specialist at Riley has worked quite a bit with the new media specialist at Cooper. So she's seen what Cooper looks like. She's seen the unpacking process, talked to the other media specialists. How did you pack? How did you purge? All of the media specialists have been told purging is part of this process. It's really going to help you, because what you don't want to do, just like in the 13 renovation, when we go to a building and say, you don't want to just pack all the things in your room, come back in the fall and throw half of it away. Throw half of it away now if that's what's going to end up happening, so it's easier for you to pack. So the purge process is done not in a just in a manner to try to thin out the books. It's really an opportunity to look through the items and see how often is this particular item been checked out. If it's rarely checked out, is it dated? Is it out of date? Those are the items that they remove. They'll run through that process, then ultimately pack up what they have. When they get it back, it's a challenge to put them back on the shelves,
I can
because
imagine.
if you think about taking something, a lot of somethings, off of the shelf A that you have right now, in the configuration that it is right now, you're removing it and trying to box it. It'd be great. I know when I did the shelving units in my basement, we had to move everything out. We put little labels on all of them because it was going back to the same exact spot, the same exact
But not- this
configuration
isn't
and
happening.
location. So our tags goes right there. These media specialists are removing items and boxing them up, having no idea really when they come back
It's a blank slate.
exactly how they're going to go again, because all the shelvings are sized differently. They're in different spaces in different places in their media centers. So it's a very big challenge. So there's a lot of conversation about that, and those who went through '22 are trying to give their input on it as well. So it's a very much a process that is it's important to it, to what we're doing, and it's important for the packing process. But actually then from the book standpoint, they have budgets as they come back. What we've seen in the 2022 buildings is we're seeing space on shelves, because now the media specialists need to go ahead and use that budget to purchase the new books to replace the other
Some of
books.
the outdated
We
ones.
have ratios that are guided by National Library Associations, and we're working off of those ratios when they put the bookshelves in. So the media specialists at this point, who are now have put their books back on the shelf, can look and say, where do I need to fill in now? Was it at my lowest lowest
Reading level.
level of reading? Is it for the K-1s? Is there a certain type in that middle school? Do we need more biography, more nonfiction, or do we need more fiction, et cetera, et cetera? So that's really what then they'll do, is to backfill those spaces. In an ideal world, is to use their budgets to purchase the books that they need to fill those spaces back up again.
Okay.
I was a bit long-winded, I apologize for
No,
that, but
no,
that was
that's-
really kind of the
that's-
process.
those are
we
the
went through.
details that we
You did a
wanted.
great job going through
Yep.
the purging process, as well as when the architects designed the number of shelves for each bookshelf and for the media center in total. As you said, they used the American Library Association ratios for that age student and then made it even richer. So
Okay,
maybe
good.
it's 1 book per, or 20 books for every child at, the 2nd grade level. We went even higher than that in determining how many shelves and the capacity that each library would have. So it's a great question, and you did a wonderful job going through that. Our media specialists have worked tirelessly in this process. But it really will be a very helpful process, because if you have books in there that are 10, 15, 20 years old, and they're not being circulated, that's a great opportunity to then redistribute those books, donate them, and then be able to fill the shelves with some new materials. So we have budgeted for that, so that we can get some new materials to fill those shelves as well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. That was a really great question, Colleen, because I'm sure it is a huge undertaking. You know,
Huge.
once you start talking about it, to unload a library, purge at the same time, and it's hard to purge. So I'm sure it's not an easy process. So kudos to the media specialists that are going through that, because that's not easy.
Yeah, and it is hard to wrap your mind around what doesn't yet exist, right? So you're saying, like, do I need this particular item? Not even just a book, but just anything. Do I need this file cabinet? Do I need X, Y, or Z? Because you're not looking at the current reality. You are looking at the current reality, and you're not quite sure of what the new reality is going to be like. So it's nice that we do have some libraries right now that they can visit. And it was great that they have been talking to those media specialists, looking at the spaces, because ultimately, each library is going to be unique, but at the same time, there's that core similarities of what we're putting in, those standards that we're putting in. So it's going to get not easier as we go along, because it's still a lot of work, but it's just that there's some mental model they can then pick up by going
Someone did it
to
first.
a building that's similar to theirs, because this district has a lot of what we call sister buildings. They're similarly architecturally created, and you can go take a look at that one if it's been done and maybe get some ideas.
Yeah, that's really such a time-consuming job. So I'm sure it doesn't happen overnight. I'm sure it's taking time to get those ready and.
Yeah,
And,
and kudos to the pioneers of 2022, the ones that did it first.
Exactly.
Being first is great a lot of times, and being first is really tough sometimes.
Yes.
It has the pros and the cons.
And Mrs. O'Brien and Mr. Green have spent a considerable amount of time also working with the media specialists, with Mr. Casada, in really working through what are their needs, talking with principals, providing some extra support to the media specialists during that time. So I appreciate everyone's efforts. It really is a team to get this done.
No doubt.
Great.
I just wanted to say thank you for printing these out. I do like to see them on the screen, but it makes a really better difference to look at these in person or on paper. And they look fantastic. It's just so exciting to see all the different choices that people made. I mean, like you said, they're similar pieces, but the coloring and how they
patterns.
add their own unique flair to each media center. So it's really exciting to see, and I appreciate, I know this takes a lot of time to put together, but it's great to look at it, and it's exciting to see, so thanks for doing that.
Well, I'll say that was Mr. Weber's idea to pull them out of the giant packet, and
Yeah.
he said, just in case you want to print them out to put in front of folks on Monday. So
Yeah,
that was
we
a good
appreciate
idea.
that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
I'm just going to run through the couple of the numbers, so I don't think I've said it aloud for the folks at home. I just want to say that this is NBS Commercial Interiors is who we're working with on these furniture products. They have procured the items through multiple manufacturers. They're all listed through the letters from NBS and from Plan Grant Cressa. But out of all of them, they all are using some form of a national cooperative purchase organization or contract. So all of them have some different ones. We've got the NCPA, we've got Omnia Partners cooperative contract, we've got the E&I cooperative services. All of those fulfill the board's obligation to bid. And through NBS as well, they put into the quotes, if you noticed, they actually put their own 5% contingency into that, because there's always going to be a little bit like, oops, we need one more shelf, or there's something with the chairs, we're going to add or switch around some things as we go along. So we're working on a not to exceed total, like we did last year, of $926,000. That number is different than last year, of course, because they're just different buildings, and that number does not include the bookshelves, which we've already done. So we're looking at a not to exceed of 926 on this project. That would cover the 5 buildings that we went over.
Great. And that also includes the contingency, correct?
Yeah, that's including that is the 926,000 includes a 5%.
Great, thank you.
And we're ready to bid on that, or
To put it for approval. Yes.
vote.
Regular
on
meeting?
that, yeah.
Yes, next regular meeting. I don't know why that's not going through.
Great, excellent. Are you staying for C?
Yeah, hang out. It's gonna be scoreboards. You love
All right,
scoreboards.
Yeah.
fantastic. I'm in.
All right, well, then 3C, we're here, we're ready then. Purchase of school, scoreboards for high school baseball, softball fields. Gentlemen, go ahead.
Yep, so the baseball and softball fields of the 3 high schools, Franklin, Stevenson, Churchill. We are looking to purchase 6 scoreboards. Obviously, 2 at each school, 1 for baseball, 1 for softball. Same boards at each of those fields, and the differences, there would simply be things like color, logo, etc. But they would be probably the same boards. Getting those from Daktronics, it's probably a company many of you have heard of. We have boards in the district with Daktronics. We have a couple of boards from a different manufacturer. We've had some issues with them. To my knowledge, we've had very little issue with Daktronic boards. This is a company that we wanted to target and work with based upon their boards themselves. They have an installation partner, AJ Signs. So in your packet, you saw 2 different quotes. We have a quote for the boards, and those with regard to Daktronics would be let me find my number, $66,304. That's for 6 boards. And then installation of $65,000 for the 6 signs, for the 6 scoreboards, I should call them, for a total of $131,304. What we're looking at is, for the most part, simply a takedown and then a put back up in most instances. We have 2 locations where, if we can, we are looking to move them. We're not 100% sure we can or how it would work. Will it be in play if we do? But we asked Daktronics and AJ Signs to have in the installation quote a quote to actually, instead of take down and put up, a quote that included for 2 signs to be moved, because therefore it would need additional steel if it gets moved, because it can't reuse what's the current footings, etc. So that means that we have the 131,304, which is the ideal number, if you will, if we're able to move both of those signs. There is some work that LPS would have to do if we do move those signs, just so you know. If you look at the quote that AJ gave, it said electric is not included. That's something that we would have to pull the electric out to the new location if we can make that work. Okay. Worst case scenario is all 6 of them come down and the new scoreboard goes up just in the same location.
Okay. Mrs. Bradford has a question.
Thank you. So is there a reason that we have to move?
It's just sight lines. The
And-
reason for both are sight lines.
And who determined that? Like, did the coaches ask
Correct,
to
the
move
schools,
those?
yes.
Yeah, the schools
Yes,
asked
they
to
said
move
if we can move them, it'd be a better sight line from the bench.
those. Okay.
So it's not anything, I mean, it's something they've
Yeah,
had
there's
for
nothing
years.
wrong with them being there. They just
Correct,
more for.
correct. The only thing that's wrong with them is they're not ideal. It's just
Okay.
for location. So if we move the one and it's in play, then we're not gonna move it.
Sure.
Right, so we're gonna try to do our best to get them to have some better sight lines. If not, it's still coming with a new board.
Okay, great, thanks.
And there's just, the only real slight changes that occur with any of the boards is the baseball boards, without any charge from Daktronics, they have no problem changing out. They have a section that, here's actually for you to take a peek at. So where it says at bat, in softball, it will say at bat. In baseball, there's a pretty important statistic that the MHSAA is really driving home, and you said it, the pitch count. So they have no problem, Daktronics has no problem taking down the lettering that would be at bat and simply putting pitch count so that they can then register pitch count on the scoreboard for that. That's things like that Daktronics has been very good about. They said the lettering we're not worried about. With regard to what I showed you, the logo, this rendering is not necessarily the final one. The schools are gonna have some of their own choices. We could move up the logo. We can put, Patriots across here. We can put softball across here. All that's included in the price that we've got. So it's pretty neat. They're excited. I've had a couple of meetings with the principals and the athletic directors. Everybody's fired up. Their coaches are fired up. Who doesn't like, getting something updated? Exactly. So they're all taking their own little spin on what they want to have written on it, or which logo they're going to choose for their boards. But it's one of those fun things we get to do is work with them on projects like this.
Very cool.
And this would be on the regular, please.
Mr. Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Phil, remind me, was Daktronics the same company that we used for the football fields?
Pardon me. I'm
Is
sorry.
Daktronics the same company?
No, so the two boards that are at Franklin and at Stevenson are a different manufacturer. Churchill has a Daktronics board. We did their field first,
Right.
and that was a Daktronics board there.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Timing, thank you, Brian. The timing on this would really be, it won't be for this coming baseball season, right? With regard to the lead time on the boards themselves and then the installation, we're looking to be working on it through the spring and the summer and have them done. And that's always just presuming that the lead times we're given today is the actual lead times that we end up with.
Sure. Any other questions? Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. You already said this will be on regular. Thank you. And that concludes Building and Site. Appreciate both of
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Weber,
guys.
for being here. Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Thank you, Mr. Francis.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for being here, Paul. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, that leads us to item 4, Curriculum Committee, and Mrs. Acosta is not with us this evening, so perhaps Mrs. Bonnefield can take
Yep.
that.
So we've got one item for curriculum tonight, and that is item A, limited schools of choice for 23-24, and Mr. Etu and Mr. Green will assist us with those.
Thank you. Good evening. Let's play ball with schools of choice. Too soon? Too soon. I couldn't resist.
Yes,
It was
that's
too
too soon.
exciting. Good evening, everyone. It's that time of year to discuss our plans for limited schools of choice for the upcoming school year. As you know, last week at our study session, we discussed the history and status of our limited schools of choice program, also referred to as 105, 105C. During that meeting, I was grateful to have the opportunity to review various data points with the board and bring forth discussion on our proposal moving forward with this upcoming school year. Before we continue to discuss next year, I would like to take a few moments with our viewing audience to provide an overview of limited schools of choice through 105, 105C. We have offered in Livonia limited schools of choice since the 2014-15 school year. Limited schools of choice through 105, 105C allows local school districts to enroll non-resident students and count them in membership without having to obtain approval from the district of residence. Limited schools of choice applications are accepted for a limited number of seats at specific grade levels. Limited schools of choice is open to residents of Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, Monroe, and Washtenaw counties. In other words, local districts within Wayne County or those who reside in contiguous intermediate school districts. These windows for applications are open for 30 days, after which, if necessary, we hold a publicly recorded lottery here in the board office for certain grade levels. Shortly thereafter, families that are accepted would be notified through our pupil accounting department that they are invited to register their child. And as we spoke last week, the elementary and secondary departments then, in partnership with the human resources department, place registered limited schools of choice students into the appropriate grade level and building. This process is always done with the utmost care so as not to inflate class sizes in any location. As we discussed last week, during the 2022 school year, we enrolled 132 students for roughly an additional $1,100,000 in revenue. But more importantly, in addition to the revenue, or as important as the revenue, those placements help rebalance class size and fill gaps at various locations throughout our schools without negatively impacting class size. And we spent time last week discussing how those placements are strategically placed at different grade levels after monthly enrollment analysis. So after an internal review of last year's data for the 23-24 school year, we're recommending to the board offering up to 185 total seats through 105 and 105C schools of choice programs for grades K through 6. We will not be offering limited schools of choice for grades 7 and up next year, as we discussed. The application window would be from March 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2023, and that'll close at 4 p.m. On April 14th, 2023, there will be a publicly recorded lottery that would take place as needed for certain grade levels. And as a reminder, Niji-Iro and Webster would conduct separate limited schools of choice windows to fill those gaps for class sizes in the ACAP program and at Niji-Iro. So I would ask that this be a voting item at the January 27th, 2020, or February 27th, 2023 Board of Education meeting. I'd like to thank our cabinet team, our Board of Education for our thorough discussion last week, our assessment coordinator, Mr. Hillard, Kathy and Teresa in the pupil accounting department as well for putting the work together on the historical overview. So that's kind of 105, 105C past, present, and future. And if there's any questions at this time, Mr. Etu or myself can address those.
Any questions? I do have one that popped up after we left the last meeting is we added some extra seats. I think we were at 155 for previous years, and we bumped that up to 185 for the current year.
That is correct.
And just because we bumped up the number of seats is more for flexibility rather than we're not necessarily going to just start jamming kids into the slots.
That is correct. We talked last week about our capture rate being real solid, especially for our younger grades, and having that flexibility increase that number. But also, when we go to that lottery, we'll identify through our enrollment process where we feel comfortable with how many seats at each grade level. And what's nice about that is we set that number, and if we have to hit that number, whatever we publicly announce, but then if there is wiggle room, we can go to our wait list, as we discussed last week as well at those grade levels.
Just correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we were at 185 and we're staying at 185, correct?
That is correct.
Oh, my error then.
We discussed
Okay.
reducing
I
that
apologize.
last week, but we were gonna stay at 185, I'm sorry, yep. Keep it as the same level as last year, correct.
I apologize. Thank you. I apologize for that. Mrs. Burton.
Yes, we discussed this at length last week, but for those who may not have been present or tuning in, we're not looking at hiring any more teachers. We are looking at basically balancing out some classrooms where we may have an imbalance in classrooms or maybe even a need for split classes. This, being able to pick up a few kids here and there and place them strategically in classrooms where we may have some gaps reduces the necessity for split classes. It may not eliminate it entirely, but it certainly reduces that. And it also helps make sure that our enrollment stays as stable as possible, but we are still a declining enrollment district, as most districts are in the state of Michigan. Livonia Public Schools historically has about 1% of the population of the state of Michigan, but the fact is Michigan, the folks in Michigan are having fewer kids than we used to. I mean, it's true with most states in the country, but it is definitely true with Michigan. So our percentage for the state of Michigan has not dropped, but the fact that we have fewer babies being born in Michigan is dropping. But
Correct.
if we participate in the schools of choice on a very limited basis like this, it's helping to stabilize our school enrollment, so we don't have situations where we've got lopsided classes, as many split classes, or school closures or things along that line. It's just helping us maintain It's not to exceed what we have in a given year. We're still losing some each year, but this is just helping to mitigate that loss.
Absolutely. We did not add any additional FTEs due to schools of choice in the last 2 years. In fact, we were able to strategically place those students, and as we talked in study session, this window is a 30-day window, so families are very aware of this window. They're very involved and active in going through that process, and as such, they have on par, if not better, attendance as we dove into that as well. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Thank you.
We had a question, Mr.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. I have a couple of questions, and you may or may not have this information at hand. We started the program in 2014, 2015.
Yes.
And what grades did we bring in at that time?
I believe that was K-4 to start, but I would have to defer to the superintendent on that. K-4?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so K-4, where I was going with that, I was wondering if we know how many of those students are still with us that came in that year.
That was a question last week, and we can run those cumulative reports. When I ran that report last year with Ms. Monk, the retention of those students was solid. It was, I can't say it was on par with our students that live in our community, but it wasn't. They're coming here, they're staying here. A lot of times they roll off of our enrollment dock and they actually move to our city. So sometimes it's a gateway as for families to move to the city of Livonia, and then they become local residents of our district.
And doing the math in my head, and I wasn't very good in math, those students wouldn't have graduated yet, right? They would be 11th grade juniors now? My math is pretty good.
They started in
Seniors this year.
They may just be in middle school.
Right,
Mhm.
okay.
Mhm.
My recollection was we were 185 last year?
Yeah.
Correct? And we had
Correct.
132 enrolled.
Correct.
Do we know how many actually applied, and did we have to do a lottery last year?
We had, at K-8 last year, we had 272 applicants, and we had 155 accepted through the lottery. Now, that 155, 123 registered with us, and that was about 80%.
Okay.
And that, at the K-8 level, yes.
Is that 80% about average for the classes that we have accepted?
It was better than the year before when I started in this role, and it's, talking to Kathy Hayes, I think there was a few reasons it seemed higher than in past years. We were on this process a little sooner than in the past. We were identifying those enrollment gaps where we could place students, and we were offering them those placements sooner because sometimes those families may be on a timeline themselves, and if we wait too long and into the summer, they may have made other plans by then. So I don't have that retention rate or as far as capture rate from previous years, but according to the Pupil County Department, it was above previous years.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. We're gonna vote on this on the 27th. Yep, okay,
Thank you.
thank you. That concludes curriculum.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Etu?
Thank you.
Then we'll move on to item 5, finance, and we'll stay with Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you, President Johnson. For finance, we have one item tonight, and it's a really fun item. Mr. Etu is going to talk about a monster truck.
Well, thank you very much. Monster truck. If it's okay, I'm going to call up with me Principal of the Career Center, Gary Harper, and our construction trades teacher, Tim Martin, if they can join us up here. You're live.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Hello there, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you, President Johnson and the Board of Education. We're excited to come here and discuss the possible purchase of a large truck through the LCTC construction, for the LCTC construction trades program in the grant through 61C, which is for vocational equipment. We are looking for, the grant is approved for up to $81,000.
Yep.
And we have gone out and received several quotes that all fall below that mark. And we shared a few of those quotes last week. We looked at a 4x2 and a couple 4x4s, and we're looking at F550s and F600s. They're capable of towing anything and everything within the construction trades program, as well as the spray trailer that's available from that standpoint. The reason we don't want to exceed $81,000 is because of the inventory out there right now in the dealerships in terms of off the lot pretty quick. So we will continue to shop as we move through this process, but we do have some sample quotes for you from that standpoint. But I will turn it over to Mr. Martin to maybe describe a little further in terms of the truck itself that you're looking for.
Yeah, so basically we broke it down to trying to eliminate limitations with the program. So the truck we were looking for to pull like all of our equipment at max load, so for safety and being on the road and back and forth. So we were looking at something that was an F550 or an F600, 4x4 preferred. And and they run the gamut, like Mr. Itu said, that we can, as far as interiors and the beds that are on them and the tow packages and things like that. So trying to get something that's on a lot would be preferred. But we're looking at up to 20,000 pounds that we could. That's if we ever maxed out a trailer, which I don't ever plan on doing it. But that was one of the items that came up when we were talking about towing across town. We got to have something that can do it. So, and I know that did come up before, but we do have vehicles that can tow with minimal standards and moving things around. But we're just looking forward for the growth of the program and just removing all limitations with our vehicle.
And again, this is through the 61C grant for vocational equipment that Mr. Martin wrote up for up to $81,000.
President Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. And Tim, is this replacing a vehicle, or is this a new,
This is a new
an addition?
We have a van, E250 cargo van, you can, I don't even know what the tow rating is on that. It's very limited, but probably about 3 tons. So, and that's loaded down with all the tools for our on-site program, our Construction 2 program. So that is like pretty much the daily driver is that van, and that was also purchased with 5 years ago, 61C grant that I had wrote and put together, so.
Okay, because of the size of the towing, would this vehicle require an air brake?
An air brake, no.
Depends what you get, no.
Okay. Okay, I noticed there were 3 quotes. I'm assuming if you're looking for something on the lot, they may not all have the exact same equipment, but any of the quotes will have everything that we're looking for?
Yes.
Yes.
They're all gonna have any one of the F550s or 600 is gonna have the minimum towing capacity of, it's like 19,900 and some odd pounds, which our largest trailer is 4,500 pounds, and our machine is 7,000 pounds. So most cases, that's what's gonna be the heaviest load I'm trailering. But if the dump trailer that we have, if we're loading gravel or sand or dirt, taking to the site, most cases I'm putting 2-3 yards of material in there, which is not, it's only a couple more tons on top of it, but just playing the game safe, getting the F550 or 600, they all have that towing capacity.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. I just wanted to commend you for going ahead and applying for that 61C grant, because I think, if I'm correct, the spray trailer, didn't we purchase that last year?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Correct.
so, and I remember that was a pretty exciting time to get the spray trailer. So obviously, you're really on to what you need as far as equipment, and I think it's great that you applied. I know how difficult it is to apply for these grants, but it takes time, and I commend you for doing that, because I think this is a wonderful truck to have, and I think the students will really benefit from it. I know they're not gonna drive it, but
No,
I better
they will
put that
not be driving
disclaimer
it.
in there. They're not gonna drive it, but it's important to be able to get your equipment to the site
Right.
in the right way, and so I really appreciate you doing that, and that helps out the district tremendously and saves us a little bit of money, and if the
Right.
grant is there, that's wonderful. So thanks so much for applying for that for another time, because
Yep.
we know how hard you work, so thank you.
Is there any, Mrs. Burton?
And just, so the public is clear on this, this is a grant that was applied for by Mr. Martin, and it cannot be used for anything other than equipment for the CTE program. So
Correct.
it has to be used for that kind of a program, has to be equipment, can't be salaries, other expenses,
No.
et cetera.
Right.
So, yeah, the state of Michigan is putting that money out there for that kind of program. I'm thrilled that you took the initiative and
Yeah.
got it.
I will every time.
Good job.
Thank you. President Johnson?
Another one that just jumped into my mind, the max is 81,000?
The max, yep.
If this vehicle is, say, 71, is there availability of that other 10,000 to buy additional equipment?
The grant's written
So-
specifically for the truck.
For the
What I've done in the past, like, well, last year I got the spray foam trailer and the skid steer, so we had like 180,000 almost. So if I find a truck that's not fully equipped or something, like the one I'm looking at preferably would have a flatbed on it so we can transfer lumber packages and things on the back of the truck when it's not towing. I would like to put some tie downs on it that were already, because not every truck is gonna come. Some of them have a stake bed on it, which is like side rails that pop off. Some of them are flatbed. Some of them have I'd even go with, if it was the last resort, they have like a mini dump bed on there. I wouldn't want that because we already have a dump trailer. But if it came down to it, we could have it spend the extra 10,000 or something if it came in at that price. The grant, I think it's pretty fluid, as long as we're using it for that piece of equipment, we could
Correct.
use it to add on to that
Gotcha.
Okay,
piece
good.
of equipment.
Okay.
So I did that with the skid steer, I added attachments for it, so we had the skid steer with a bucket, and I added a truss boom and different pieces to it.
Okay.
Excellent.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank
Wow,
you.
we're lucky to have you.
Yeah.
We really are.
Absolutely.
Are there
He does a great job.
any other questions about the really awesome truck?
Mrs. Bonnefield wants to be the first one to get a ride in the truck. She'll be first in
Come out
line.
and drive it.
The first guest to be
There you go.
a rider in the truck, not a driver.
All right, and then, we're voting on this?
Please.
This will be on the regular.
At the meeting?
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Or no.
Oh, yes.
okay, and then we'll get that under control. Is there anything else that's it for finance. Do you guys have anything else for us for the truck?
No.
Okay,
Okay.
Nope, that's it.
then
Thanks for
that
being here, Tim, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you very
concludes
much.
finance, and thank
I want
you.
to appreciate everybody. The board is great. Our superintendent is great. Thank you for allowing us year after year to get new equipment through the grants, so I really appreciate everything that you do for us over at the Career Center. So it's I'm so excited to see the robotics, and I'm so excited just to get this over with.
Yeah, yeah.
My staff is pretty wants to get it over with too. But yeah, thank you very much for allowing us to be here today and to do that. Thank you.
Thank you again, I appreciate it.
Great opportunities for our kids, for sure.
Okay, that'll move us on to item 6, Policy Committee, and Mrs. Burton.
I don't have anything for policy at this time. We will in the next couple months, I'm sure. Mrs. Oquist, do we have anything?
We do not.
All righty.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. That takes us to item 7, Personnel Committee, Mrs. Bradford.
We do not have anything tonight, is that correct, Mrs. O'Quist?
We do not.
Thank you, we're all set.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. That takes us to item 8, Legislative, Mrs. Jarvis.
We have nothing on the agenda today, although I wanted to mention that there are a couple pieces of legislation pending. One of them happened today. They were discussing in the House about taking the flunked part out of the third grade reading bill, and so that's moving along. And the other one is our own Senator Paul Hankey has introduced some legislation that would allow us to use sinking funds for transportation purposes. And my understanding is that when those funds were expanded to cover technology and security, transportation was part of that original bill, but that part had been stripped off. So we're trying to get that put back on and expand the use for those funds. And I'm sure that Mr. Centers can tell us more about that.
Yeah, that'll be in committee tomorrow. and not up for a vote, but the following Tuesday will be up for a vote in committee. And it sounds like there'll be some substitute language that allows for some capital maintenance as well. So that's exciting. And the Senate Bill 12, which is third grade reading, the mandatory retention is up in House Ed tomorrow morning, and I will actually be testifying for it. So it's exciting.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you for
Thank you.
doing
You-
that,
you
Dan.
Thank you
go.
for your advocacy.
Absolutely. And I don't know that there's anything else to add. Mrs. Oquist?
No, thank you.
Then we're all set from legislative.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. That brings us to the end of our agenda, and we have nothing else this evening, so this meeting is concluded. Thank you and good night.